are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, your host for Locked On Seahawks. Joining me for our Wednesday episode, my co-host in crime, Rob Rain. Glad to have you listening in to Locked On Seahawks for your first listen. We are free and available every day on multiple platforms, so make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. Throughout this show, we're going to be tackling a number of different topics. Going to be looking at a few receivers that have either hit the waiver wire or soon will be, as well as a defensive end that might be able to help their pass rush a little bit, see whether or not the Seahawks might investigate that. And we're going to hand out our midseason awards on the defensive side of the football. So let's get to it. Now for your lead story here on Locked On Seahawks. At 3-5, the Seahawks are in last place in the NFC West. They're a game out of the final wild card spot. Coming out of their bye week, they could use any break they can catch. Well, they may have caught that unexpected first break today. The Green Bay Packers will be without Aaron Rodgers for at least their game on Sunday against the Kansas City Chiefs, potentially longer, as he tested positive today for COVID-19, and he apparently is unvaccinated, and that creates a major problem for the Packers because, first and foremost, he told reporters the end of August that he was vaccinated. At least that's how reporters interpreted it. He said, yeah, I'm immunized, but apparently he was not vaccinated. The NFL and the Packers both knew that he was not vaccinated. There's questions about protocols. We're not going to dig too much into that, but this certainly is impactful for the Seahawks because the first game they have coming out of their bye 2 Sundays from now is at Lambeau Field, where they haven't won since 1999. And Rob, the earliest that Aaron Rodgers can practice now that he's got to enter quarantine and he's unvaccinated is next Saturday, the day before that matchup between the Seahawks and Packers. And he's got to have a negative test and not have symptoms to be able to practice that day. And so there's plenty of uncertainty revolving around Aaron Rodgers' status going into this game. The Seahawks could end up being the team that has their starting quarterback for this game at Lambeau Field.
Yeah, who would have thought that? Obviously with Russell Wilson coming off of his right middle finger injury and the surgery, getting the pin removed, I think that there was going to be so much talk about whether or not the Seahawks would have their starting quarterback available for that game. Now it looks like it's every bit as likely as the Seahawks are going to have their starting quarterback and the Green Bay Packers may not have Aaron Rodgers available. Now, the Green Bay Packers have, of course, prepared for this possibility of having to replace Aaron Rodgers, investing the first-round pick a couple of years ago, controversially enough, making that selection of Jordan Love. But let's face it, Jordan Love has not exactly set the world on fire when he has had his opportunities. And it's not just Aaron Rodgers. Davante Adams himself had a positive COVID test. So while Davante Adams, the all-pro wide receiver, of course, is expected to be available likely this week against those Kansas City Chiefs, and then certainly likely to be available against the Seattle Seahawks. The fact that Rodgers and Davante Adams have not shown the same rapport so far this season, Corbin, that to me is all the more alarming from a Green Bay Packers perspective, because you do need that time to be able to build up that chemistry. The Green Bay Packers have had to reshuffle their offensive line, as has historically been the case. So yeah, this is a huge news from a Seahawks perspective. If the Green Bay Packers don't have Aaron Rodgers, this is a pretty mortal football team, despite the fact that they're 7-1, having won 7 consecutive games.
Yeah, and they've had a number of players that have tested positive over the last week and a half. And I don't know all the details behind this, but apparently there was a big Halloween party with a bunch of the players, and Aaron Rodgers was one of them that was there. And being unvaccinated, that goes against NFL protocols. Again, I don't want to take a lot of time diving into protocols, whether or not Rodgers is in the wrong, the Packers were in the wrong. But he has put his team in a very difficult position here because they're at the top of the NFC right now. They hold the tiebreaker over the Arizona Cardinals for beating them last week, but you've got the Cardinals right there. You've got the Los Angeles Rams at 7-1 as well. Right behind them, 6-2, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. there are a number of really good teams atop the NFC that are trying to vie for that one first-round bye that we now have since there's 7 playoff teams. Only one team gets that first-round bye. The Packers, if they end up losing these next 2 games, that puts them to 7-3. And suddenly, yeah, they're still in good shape in the NFC North, but suddenly they're in trouble trying to win that number 1 seed. Could they rebound from it? Sure. But 2 games out of a 17-game season, that's a pretty good chunk if he ends up missing both those games. And again, he is eligible to return if he has a negative test and he's asymptomatic next Saturday. So being the veteran that he is, I'm not going to sit here and doubt that he could be available and ready to go on Sunday, but that is going to be a very tall task for him to do, especially considering the fact that he's not even allowed in the facility during the next 10 days. He is severely restricted, and that's the downside for choosing not to be vaccinated. So the Seahawks could benefit from that, no question about it. Russell Wilson, it looks like he's trending in the right direction. Pete Carroll said a couple of days ago that it would take him a few days after his pin was taken out before he'd be able to throw the football. Well, this is Russell Wilson that we're talking about, and he posted a video yesterday, one day after having his pin removed, and what was he doing at his personal facility? He was throwing the football, chucking the pigskin around, looked very comfortable doing so, had a little glove on his hand, so he was still protecting it to an extent, but he is making great progress. He's ahead of schedule. So right now he's trending to be available in that game coming out of the bye week. Now the big question is going to be, do the Packers have their quarterback? And we won't know that answer until we get to next Saturday, because they're not going to be able to get him out of his quarantine until then, being an unvaccinated player. If he was vaccinated, all he needs is 2 negative tests that are 24 hours apart and to be asymptomatic, and then he can come off of the COVID list. He doesn't have that luxury due to NFL protocols being unvaccinated. So this is where that debate comes in play. Is it worth it? You're putting your team in a really difficult spot, and that's what Aaron Rodgers has done. Now the question is, will the Seahawks benefit from that? Is Rodgers going to be able to play in this game? We'll find out when we get to next weekend, but certainly this was unexpected news. I'm sure that Matt LaFleur, the coach of the Packers, it was his birthday today. Happy birthday, coach. Your quarterback's out for at least this week. Can't even imagine what the reaction was when he first found out that news. And now thinking, I might not have my quarterback against the Chiefs or the Seahawks. It puts the Packers certainly in a challenging situation. They did win without Devontae Adams and Allen Lazard, 2 of their top receivers last week in Arizona, but they still had Aaron Rodgers. The quarterback is a huge loss, as the Seahawks have won without Russell Wilson the past few weeks. So we'll see what happens when we get to that game, but certainly this could work to the Seahawks' advantage. Even if Rodgers is able to play, he's going to get very little preparation time, at least on the field, for this game in Week 10. When we return in the second quarter, the trade deadline is passed, but you see some teams releasing some veterans, put them on the waiver wire. There may be a few players out there. The Seahawks didn't make any trades. Will they make some waiver claims looking to add to their roster in the post-trade deadline? Rob and I will discuss a handful of names that either are already on the market or could be on the market in the near future. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hey, Seahawk fans, this is Corbin Smith with an incredible app everyone who buys gas needs to know about. It's called Get Upside. My listeners are making up to 25 cents for every gallon of gas every time they fill up. All you need to do is download the free Get Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now. Use the promo code TOUCHDOWN and get a bonus 25 cents per gallon on your first fill up. That's up to 50 cents cash back. Don't pay full prices at the pump anymore. Get cash back using Get Upside. Download the app for free and use the promo code TOUCHDOWN to get up to 50 cents per gallon cash back on your first tank. Some people who drive a lot are making as much as $200 to $300 a month in cash back, and there's no catch. The cash gets added right to your account. You can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or an e-gift card for places such as Amazon and other brands. Download the free Get Upside app and use promo code TOUCHDOWN to get up to 50 cents per gallon cash back on your first tank. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Wednesday edition. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Joining me, as always, my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. The trade deadline passed at 4 p.m. Eastern time yesterday, so NFL teams now are no longer able to make trades, but that doesn't mean that there won't be some roster movement here over the next few weeks. We've already seen a handful of players get released by their respective teams. A couple big names, Desean Jackson being waived by the Rams yesterday. He is currently in his 24-hour waiver period. So we'll have an idea here soon who claimed him, if anyone claimed him off waivers. The veteran receiver was upset about his playing time with the Rams and asked for his release. They obliged. He's out there. Bradley Anae, young player formerly from Utah that was with the Dallas Cowboys. He's been productive, but they decided to waive him a few days ago. So he's available on the market as well. But really the biggest name that we have to start with, we'll get to Jackson, we'll get to Anae. Let's talk about a player that has not been waived as of the time of this recording, but it looks like he's on the way out, and that is Odell Beckham Jr. with the Cleveland Browns. Just to break down what's happened in Cleveland, Beckham's coming off a torn ACL that ended his 2020 season prematurely, got started a few weeks late this year when he finally returned to the lineup, and overall his production's been hit and miss in Cleveland, and he and Baker Mayfield just never have seemed to get on the same page. And over the past few days, LeBron James has come out on Twitter and said, free Odell from Cleveland. And so that's not necessarily good news if you're the Cleveland Browns. His father was throwing a hissy fit on social media, posting a video. So he's raising a stink. He's frustrated with the number of reps that he's getting, the targets he's getting from Baker Mayfield, still just 28 years old. So there are reports surfacing now that Coach Kevin Stefanski has told players in the Cleveland Browns that Odell Beckham will not be back. And he did not deny that. He didn't say that it was happening, but did not deny it today in his press conference. So there is a really good chance that Odell Beckham Jr. is hitting the market, and that presents intrigue for teams that are in the top 10, top 15 on the waiver wire. And because the Seahawks have gotten off to a slow start, Rob, they are number 10 in the pecking order. That at least would put them in a range where if they put in a claim, they might get Odell Beckham. Now, I don't know if they would actually do that or not, but I certainly think this is something John Schneider would explore if indeed Beckham is released.
I think that John Schneider will explore it, Corbin, just because of the fact that he has Russell Wilson, obviously one of the NFL's best quarterbacks at his disposal. He also has Pete Carroll, one of the player-friendliest coaches at his disposal. And Kevin Stefanski, the head coach of the Cleveland Browns, look, he's a good coach. The Cleveland Browns are playing good football, but this is still a run-heavy offense in Cleveland, and they're very much are spreading the football around. Baker Mayfield, as a former walk-on that wound up winning the Heisman Trophy, I mean, mostly out of grit and certainly talent. I don't want to I don't want to describe him as not having talent, but he is not a guy who necessarily is ever going to see eye to eye with a player who is as flashy as Odell Beckham Jr. is. But Russell Wilson and Odell Beckham Jr. have kind of a history together. They appear, at least, to be kind of buddies and have worked together in the past. And certainly the Seahawks have always shown a willingness to be willing to gamble on great athletes. And while Odell Beckham has struggled a little bit with durability, he is still a great athlete. He is a guy who, in my opinion at least, is at his best when he's in the slot going up against one-on-one coverage, and that's all he would face with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett drawing the vast majority of coverage. The Seahawks like to run the football, of course, as well. But at the same time, when you have a quarterback the talent of Russell Wilson, I think that could be a draw for Odell Beckham. So I think that he might be somebody who might be willing to come to Seattle if Seattle, of course, puts in that waiver claim in the first place, might be willing to come to Seattle and go all in rather than the kind of half in I think that he has been previously in Cleveland and with the New York Giants, frankly, as well.
You look at the contract, and I think in past seasons, the Seahawks never would have considered to put in a waiver claim. For one thing, the Seahawks have been way too far down the waiver wire to be able to get a player like Beckham if he's released. They got Josh Gordon a few years ago, but he had all of the off-field baggage, the suspensions, hadn't played very much in the past several years. This is a little different with Odell Beckham, even though his numbers are kind of down. This is a guy that still 2 years ago had a 1,000+ yard season for the Browns. He was on pace for that type of season last year before he got hurt. He can get involved in your run game. That was something Cleveland did well with him last year, is they mixed him in with some jet sweeps and reverses. They got the football into his hands in different ways. It feels like they haven't been able to do that since he came back from his injury this year. But I think the Seahawks, with the offense they run with Shane Waldron, there would be some appeal in that regard with Odell Beckham Jr. joining DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. And you look at the contract since it's halfway through the season, the Seahawks would only be on the hook for a cap hit this year, a little over $8 million. They have almost $13 million in cap space right now. They haven't shown that they have any interest in using that cap space for other purposes. So we know they like having as much receiver talent as possible. Beckham's 28. He's still in his prime. I think he is still a fantastic playmaker. You put him with Russell Wilson, who, as you said, those two do have a relationship. They have worked out together in the offseason before. They're friends. I think that you could make that connection work, and the price point would make sense. There's no dead cap money the next 2 years on his contract either. So if the Seahawks are like, you know what, we don't want to pay you $15 million in 2022 and 2023 because we got to pay DK Metcalf. We already have paid Tyler Lockett. You could trade him and get draft capital for him. You could just cut him outright. You won't have to eat any money. This could be a half a year rental for the Seahawks. And one heck of a rental at that, putting him with the weapons that they already have. On the flip side, the one thing that I would worry about here, aside from the durability, because he has had some injury problems, issues staying healthy, the other thing that would concern me, would his ego allow him to thrive in Seattle when you've already got DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett getting the majority of the targets? On the flip side there, I think that he would have a lot of opportunities in one-on-one as the number 3 target. I mean, how our defense is going to defend that, but he's averaging around 5.6 targets per game. Is he going to get that in Seattle when he's been unhappy with that number in Cleveland? That's the big question mark for me. Does the ego check out? If the Seahawks think that they can handle that they can get him in the right mindset and that he wants to play with Russell Wilson, he's willing to be that number 3 guy, then I think you absolutely, being that high on the waiver wire, go for it. See if you can get him. Some of those teams near the top that have 1-5, 1-6 records probably aren't going to claim him. That gives you a chance at number 10 to steal a former All-Pro player that is still in his prime. So I actually am all in on this one. If he gets waived, I think John Schneider should absolutely put in a waiver claim because you're not on the hook the next 2 years if you don't want to be. You can cut him. You can trade him. Get some draft capital to work with, use him as a half-season rental right now, and it gives your offense another dynamic playmaker. Whereas Desean Jackson, as fast as he still is, you want to talk about a guy that's had injury issues, and he's 34 years old. That would be one I would be a lot more hesitant to go after when I've got D. Eskridge coming back anyway.
Well, I agree with you. I think that Odell Beckham, obviously being the younger player, and perhaps a hungrier player at this point in his career, then I do think that Seattle should be considering at least kicking the tires with him, at least having those conversations and kind of seeing. And again, to me, one of the critical factors here is Pete Carroll. I mean, just the fact that he is the player-friendly coach that he is. I mean, he's had to massage player egos for years. I mean, obviously all the success that Marshawn Lynch had here, go back to his USC days, and Matt Leinart being the golden boy that he was, Reggie Bush, of course. There's so many players at USC that Pete Carroll had to be able to kind of work around their ego and allow them to still be successful and win championships. And you just look around the rest of this division, the bold moves that the Los Angeles Rams have made over the last couple of years. Obviously, the big trade here just recently for Von Miller, but they've been making big, bold moves here for a while now. The Seahawks have to make some moves if they really want to compete with the rest of the teams in the NFC West. So I think that there is some impetus here to perhaps make a bold move. But at the same time, I remain a big Desean Jackson fan. And I think that there is something to be said for the fact that he has been with those Los Angeles Rams here for the last couple of weeks. He would be able to provide some insight of how the Rams have moved on from Shane Waldron and Andy Dickerson. And so that might be something that Seattle would be interested there as well. And then again, with Pete Carroll and his experience in the Pac-12, Desean Jackson, former superstar at Cal Berkeley, I think that there might be some interest there. And I wonder if Desean Jackson might have a little bit more interest of staying on the West Coast, whereas OBJ at the same time, I wonder if maybe he wants to go back home a little bit, kind of stay down in the South, where he obviously had a great deal of success with the LSU.
And he's not going to have flexibility with that. That's what he has to understand. He's hitting the waiver wire. Everybody's eligible for the waiver wire after the trade deadline passes. So a little bit of a difference there. Desean Jackson being older, he's probably more likely to slip through waivers, and then he can make his decision who he wants to play for. Whereas Beckham, I do expect there's going to be several teams that are going to make a claim on him if he's released. As I said, he is yet to be officially released by the Browns, but it's trending that direction. And the other player I mentioned a few moments ago, Dallas Cowboys just waived Bradlee Anae, who I believe is now in his third season out of Utah. And he is a player that you and I both loved watching for the Utes. And we know Seattle likes Utah players. They've drafted Marquise Blair, Cody Barton. They have brought in several Utah players over the years, and they really seem to like that program and the players that they churn out. So Anae is a player that might interest them if they're looking for another piece to add to their defensive line, because he's always been a solid run defender, not a great athlete, has short arms. That's really what hurt him in the draft process. He doesn't have the long arms you're looking for, but he's tough. He's an underrated pass rusher, has had some penalty issues. He made a big mistake the other night in their game against the Vikings and ended up getting released afterward. But this is still a young player that is a hand technician that plays with physicality, has the right mindset you're looking for, has some positional versatility. I think that he's worth taking a look at. That would be another player if I'm John Schneider. He's affordable. He's on a rookie contract, and he was not a first rounder. Go out and get a guy that is going to be able to play multiple positions for you, especially if you have given up on LJ Collier. Bradlee Anae gives you another player that can help your pass rush and your run defense up front.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I mean, that's the thing is that when we were talking before about wide receivers, and I would argue that if D. Eskridge is expected to come back, as fans and podcasters like yourself and I, of course, do expect, but the Seahawks know that better, obviously, than anybody, how comfortable they are with D. Eskridge being able to come back and play at a significant level this year. If that's the case, then wide receiver is not the position of concern nearly as much as it is a pass rusher or maybe even a cornerback. Another former first-round pick, Vernon Hargreaves, was released by the Houston Texans as well. But, to me, Bradlee Anae is one of those guys that's a blue-collar kind of a player that I think would fit in.
Kind of guy.
Yeah, would fit in with what Seattle is looking to do. Now, as you mentioned, he's not a great athlete. But at the same time, this is a guy who was very productive at Utah. He's a tough guy. He's a physical player, uses his hands well. Talk about making a statement to Rasheem Green, to LJ Collier, to the rest of Seattle's defensive line. Like, look, we've seen some flashes that you guys are starting to get a little bit more productive, but we're still looking for upgrades. I think that's the type of message that you're trying to send right now, especially during the bye week, that if you are not 100% committed to this squad, then we are looking for different players out there. So I think Bradlee Anae is a former Morris Trophy winner. That's something that I have some say in. And so I know Bradlee Anae pretty well from a scouting perspective. I think that Bradlee Anae could absolutely make an impact in Seattle and several other NFL teams out there. I'd be surprised if he doesn't get some interest from other clubs.
We'll see what the Seahawks choose to do, but this might be the way they try to improve their team this year, since they didn't make any deals before the trade deadline, didn't want to give up draft picks. You don't have to do that when you're claiming players off waivers. You get their contract, but it certainly looks like a way that they could fortify this roster, especially if you're able to get somebody like an Odell Beckham Jr. that's got a lot of star power that might be able to take your passing game to an unforeseen level here in Seattle. If you have Russell Wilson back and you team him up with Metcalf and Lockett again, I don't know what defenses do to try to defend that trio of receivers. Eskridge on top of it, I don't know what you do as a defense. It's going to be near impossible to slow down as long as you're using those players adequately. And Anae is a guy that I believe in a rotational role could absolutely help the Seahawks right now as they look for more consistency from that front line. We'll see if John Schneider has anything up his sleeves, but for now, it's just wait and see. They may have put in a few claims on a few of these players. We'll find out in the next 24 to 48 hours if they were able to land any of those players to add to their roster. When we come back in the third quarter, yesterday we had our offensive midseason awards, handed those out. We're going to switch to defense, dish out awards like Defensive Player of the Year, Defensive MVP, most improved, a number of other awards. So we're going to be dishing those out on the defensive side of the football when we return. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
BetOnline is back and better than ever. A new web interface for the start of the basketball season and more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the basketball and football action this season. Head to our new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code LOCKEDON to receive your bonus. From basketball, football, NHL, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet all of your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar ever. If you haven't tried a Built Bar by now, you are missing out. They say it's a protein bar, but trust me, it does not taste like one. You have to try one of these amazing bars yourself to believe it. Most protein bars are chalky or waxy. Built Bars, though, they're soft. They're covered in 100% real chocolate. And when you bite into them, it's a different experience. It feels like you're eating a candy bar. Built Bars are low carb, low calorie, low fat, low sugar, and high in protein. So all the healthy benefits on top of just purely being delicious. There are so many great flavors, including raspberry, mint brownie, my personal favorite, peanut butter brownie, salted caramel. This month, Built Bar is coming out with new limited time flavors every 3 to 4 days. So make sure to check out their website often. You don't want to miss out on these awesome limited time flavors. Go to Built.com and use the promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off your order. Use the promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Wednesday edition. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Joining me as always, Rob Rang. Normally on Wednesday, we're breaking down matchups, but with the Seahawks in the midst of a bye week, don't really have an opponent to be preparing for. So it's time for midseason awards. We kicked things off yesterday on the offensive side of the football. We're going to flip over to defense now. Let's start with defensive MVP. And again, when we talk most valuable player, there's different interpretations for which type of players deserve that award. Some people think, oh, it's the absolute best player on your team. And sometimes it's which guy truly is most valuable, which player is most irreplaceable. That's usually the way that I pick this award. But who do you think has been the Seahawks defensive MVP through the first 8 games, Rob?
Well, I'm taking the same rationale, Corbin, that I took yesterday when we said that the offensive MVP, of course, was Russell Wilson, in large part because obviously he's a great player, but also we saw the drop-off in production when it went from Russell Wilson to Geno Smith. And the player I'm going to highlight here is defensive MVP. Fortunately for Seattle, has not only been durable this year, he's been durable for a long time. But I shudder to think about how historically bad Seattle's defense might be if Bobby Wagner wasn't out there, not only leading the Seahawks in tackles, but being among the league leaders in tackles for yet the umpteenth season in a row, it seems like. So to me, he is still the defensive MVP. I think that you could make an argument for lots of other players out there. I don't think that Bobby Wagner has been at the dominant all-pro level that he has perhaps been in previous seasons, but I think he's been damn solid. And I can't say that about many other defenders on the Seahawks roster.
I thought about Wagner here because typically he has been the MVP, but I just don't know where this defense would be right now without Quandre Diggs. Because when they were struggling the first 4 or 5 games and they were giving up 450 plus yards every single game, their corners were struggling. Jamal Adams wasn't playing up to expectations. The pass rush wasn't there. The linebackers, including Bobby Wagner, were getting exploited in coverage. Quandre Diggs was the one player that was still out there making plays, and he was eliminating the post and seam routes, doing his job, manning center field. He's been coming up and sticking people all season. I mean, this guy's around 5'9", 185 pounds, soaking wet. He's not a big safety, but he comes up and he'll bring the hammer, and he's been doing that ever since the Seahawks traded for him a couple years ago. I just feel he is the most indispensable player that they have right now because that free safety spot, we saw what life was like after Earl Thomas got injured 2 different times and after Earl Thomas left in free agency. We got to see firsthand what this defense looked like when they had players like Steven Terrell playing free safety. It was an absolute nightmare. It was atrocious. But Quandre Diggs, since he arrived, has really brought stability to the back half of that defense. He's already got 3 interceptions. Oh, by the way, nobody else in the Seahawks has 1. So he has been their defensive playmaker, getting interceptions, coming up and making hits against the run. He leads the team in passes, defense, and coverage as well. So to me, he is the most valuable defensive player for the Seahawks this year. And to me, it really wasn't that close. As much as I love Bobby Wagner, in terms of value and being indispensable, Quandre Diggs has been that guy this year. Now, going to the next one, best defensive player. So this one just strictly the best overall player. I'm still going with Bobby Wagner on this one because, Rob, he's on pace for 197 tackles this year. Almost 200. Now, granted, he's going to get an extra game that's going to help push that number up a little bit. But there's only been 3 players ever. Really, it's only 2 because one guy did it twice. There have been 3 seasons where a player has had over 200 tackles. They all happened in the early 90s. This stat has only been around, officially tracked since 1987. So I'm sure there were some other ones that earlier eras probably would have been over 200. But he would be one of only 4 players to hit 197 tackles or more in a season if he can maintain this pace. He's got a pressure rate close to 30% when they blitzed him, so he's been a very effective blitzer, has gotten his hands on a few passes in coverage. He is allowing over 80% completion rate, but a lot of those are dump-offs to running backs. So that's the caveat here. I feel like he hasn't been as dominant as he was at times earlier in his career. He's 31 years old. That's to be expected, but he is still one of the premier middle linebackers in the game, and to me, he's their best defensive player for that reason.
No, I think it's an excellent point. I mean, that's why I mentioned Bobby Wagner's defensive MVP, and I'm going to steal Quandre Diggs as the best defensive player for many of the same reasons that you just provided in your argument of why he should be Seattle's defensive MVP. And rather than use the same statistics, I would just say who has been the player who has made the biggest plays in the passing game, who has been the player who has made the biggest hits in the running game, and after receivers have caught the ball. To me, that's Quandre Diggs over and over again. I think that we're basically splitting hairs here. We're talking about who the Seahawks' top 2 players are, whether it be defensive MVP or best defensive player. To me, there's no question about it. It has been Bobby Wagner and Quandre Diggs in whatever order you want to put them in.
Looking at our next one, best defensive lineman, and I'm going to say this right now. I was going to go with Darrell Taylor, but he's been playing linebacker, and I can't put him as this one because his run defense still leaves much to be desired, at least in my opinion. I feel like the best overall defensive lineman has been Poona Ford, and it might sound strange that I'm saying this because 3 or 4 weeks ago, I did not think that Poona Ford was living up to our expectations, particularly as a pass rusher, but he's got 14 pressures now through 8 games, doesn't have a sack yet, only a couple quarterback hits. So he hasn't met my expectations in that regard, but he's still been very stout against the run, especially the last 3 games. He was a monster in the game against the New Orleans Saints. They could not block him. That's a big reason Alvin Kamara was held to 2.6 yards per carry. And Poona Ford was not the problem with their run defense issues early in the season. A lot of that was happening off tackle, away from him. Teams were not running at Poona Ford because they could not block him. He was penetrating gaps. So I feel when you're looking from a consistency standpoint, it would be between him and Al Woods. And Al Woods, unfortunately, has had some really boneheaded penalties. So I have to give this one to Poona Ford, who, in my opinion, has been the most consistent. We've gotten a little more of a glimpse of his pass rushing upside in recent games, and he's still been a monster to try to block in the run game.
No, I can't disagree with that. I think that Poona Ford's consistency has been really one of the kind of unsung, storylines of Seattle's defense so far this season. But I got to talk about Darrell Taylor. I just think that Seattle needed him to be a star pass rusher, and I think that he is absolutely on the cusp of becoming that. And I don't just mean the best pass rusher on the Seahawks. I mean one of the best in all of the league. I talked about this past week, Corbin, in the victory against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Darrell Taylor didn't have a sack in that game, but he made so many impactful rushes that helped contribute to Seattle being able to kind of frazzle the number 1 overall pick, Trevor Lawrence, and really take control of that game. I think Darrell Taylor is about to become a superstar. And so I have to mention him, although, as you mentioned, he has struggled in the running game. That's something that I do expect to improve. But we know that the way the NFL has evolved, it's all about getting pressure on the quarterback. Nobody on Seattle's roster has been able to supply that nearly as often as Darrell Taylor.
Moving on to most improved, I will admit that I had a little tougher time with this one just because there weren't a lot of candidates. You can't say that about Darrell Taylor because he didn't play last year. It's hard to be improved when there's nothing to base that off of. So couldn't pick Darrell Taylor for that one. I went with the other young linebacker, Jordan Brooks, simply because even though early in the year he struggled, was kind of dealing with a sophomore slump, I think he's been one of their best players on defense the last 2 or 3 games. So we're starting to see that second-year leap that Pete Carroll and Ken Norton Jr. were hoping to see. He's second on the team with 71 tackles, so he's on pace for almost 150 tackles in his second year. He has shown glimpses of being a quality blitzer. He's gotten to the quarterback a few times. He's improving in coverage, has 3 pass breakups this year. He has given up a high completion rate, but again, a lot of that's been screens and dump-offs. He's got to do a better job of defending those screens and recognizing them, but I've seen some signs that that might be happening now. You like the aggressive nature that he plays with, the athleticism he plays with, and so he was the most obvious selection for this one on a team that honestly hasn't had many players that I feel like have made strides from last year to this year.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's where I'm going to cheat a little bit on this one. And I'm not trying to be just contrarian with you, but I think a player that that has had a very impressive season so far and continues to get better, in my opinion, is Ryan Neal. Now, he had a pretty darn impressive season last year as well. But at the same time, I think that when Seattle has seen the inconsistencies that they've seen with Jamal Adams at the nickel line or nickel cornerback spot, with Marquise Blair going down, Ugo Amadi having some big moments, but also some struggles at times. I think that Ryan Neal continues to show that he is one of Seattle's best playmakers. Again, one of Seattle's most physical players, and also emerging as a leader. Pete Carroll kind of talked about how Ryan Neal has emerged as one of the real locker room guys for this team. So to me, I think that there was a lot of people out there, myself included a little bit, considering that Ryan Neal had been, bounced around as a waiver wire guy himself, that there may have been a perception that he was a bit of a flash in the pan, excuse me. But I think that he is absolutely proving that is not the case, that he fits in beautifully with this defense and really has become one of Seattle's most bankable guys so far this season.
Moving on to our next one here, top newcomer. I thought about Darrell Taylor for this one. This is the theme of this episode. I wanted to give Darrell Taylor something, but there was always a yeah, but to it. He's not a newcomer. He was with the team last year. He just didn't play in any games. So I'm going with somebody that technically you could make an argument is not a newcomer because he didn't play for the Jaguars last year and sat out. But I had to go with Al Woods because what would they be doing right now without Al Woods in the defensive line? Brian Monet has kind of disappeared and missed a few games injured. You've got Poona Ford. Robert Kimdiche is the other DT. They've played Rasheem Green there some, but I mean, they don't have a lot of depth. Jaron Reed going to Kansas City. They had to have somebody that could help fill that void. And at 34 years of age, at 335 pounds, big old Al Woods has been fantastic. He's also given them some pass rushing. He's got, I believe, 9 pressures this year. That's quite a few through 8 games for a big nose tackle. And he can stuff the run. There's been plays where he's just used that old country strength of his and just dominated the man across from him. Got in the backfield. He's got 3 tackles for loss this year as well. Those penalties cost him the defensive lineman of the midseason, but I'm going to give him top newcomer because as far as free agent additions, draft additions, he has been the most consistent and most important player that the Seahawks brought back for 2021.
Yeah, I think you make an excellent point there. But again, I'm going to talk about a different player. And, to me, when I think of top newcomers, I think about the free agents. I also think about the rookies. And it's been a small sample size. But considering how poorly Seattle's cornerbacks played early in the season and how impressive that the rookie Trey Brown has been over the last couple of games, I've got to give him a little bit of a tip of the cap. Now, I mentioned this yesterday with Gerald Everett, the tight end position, and I didn't know that he necessarily deserved that, but he still got my award because I think that the best is yet to come with Gerald Everett. That same argument here. I think the best is yet to come with Trey Brown for the Seahawks.
Looking at our last 2 here real quick, biggest surprise and top play. For my biggest surprise for the Seahawks defense, I'm finally going to give Darrell Taylor an award. We didn't know what to expect. You know, he didn't play at all last year. He was coming off a broken leg. There were some that questioned whether he was ever going to be the player that we saw at Tennessee that Seattle thought was worth trading up for in the second round. And yet all he has done is show that explosiveness, the speed, the overlooked power off the edge. He's combined all of those, and he's really become a disruptive edge rushing force for the Seahawks. Leads the team with 4 sacks, was really close to getting 2 or 3 of them last week against Jacksonville. He's played in 7 of the 8 games. He's really been a factor in the pass rushing department. And so I've been surprised he's been as effective as he has been given the circumstances and them trying to figure out how to utilize him. Is he going to be a Leo? Is he going to be the Sam linebacker? They've really made him a hybrid between those positions, and he has really excelled rushing off the edge. And as far as top plays, there aren't many to choose from because the defense has struggled and they only have a handful of turnovers this year. So I'm going to go with Quandre Diggs, one of his 3 interceptions, the play against the Rams in the end zone, picking off his friend Matthew Stafford. Poona Ford forced Stafford out of the pocket in the red zone. Stafford's like, I'm just going to throw it out the back of the end zone. And Quandre Diggs says, not so fast, my friend. Seems to pop out of nowhere, picks off the pass, gets both feet in bounds. Rams are sent over to the sideline with no points. That, to me, was the most impactful defensive play that has been made in any game this year for the Seahawks, wiping points off the scoreboard against their bitter rivals.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And that's one that was very much high on my list as well. Going back to the biggest surprise, to me, the biggest surprise has to be Robert Nkemdiche. I mean, just obviously as a former first-round pick, that there was all kinds of expectations for him. But the fact that he's bounced around the league a little bit, and has come in and made L.J. Collier, obviously a former Seattle first-round pick, a little bit expendable. To me, that has been a surprise. Just that he made the roster in the first place and has, turned over the roster as much as he has because of his play. To me, that is definitely a big surprise for the Seahawks and a big victory, frankly, for both he and for the Seahawks as a whole. As far as the top play, as you said, Corbin, there's just been so many just disappointing plays. And so that would be one of the biggest surprises, frankly, for me, would be a little bit that I haven't seen Jamal Adams become the difference maker that as I was expecting. But I will say this, to me, one of the top plays that I've seen so far this season was one of the few times when Jamal Adams made a terrific play in coverage, breaking up a pass to George Kittle in a big win by the Seahawks over their division rival 49ers. So I don't know that it was the splashiest play. I don't know it was the most impactful play, but to me it was one of the most encouraging plays because I do think if the Seahawks are going to go on a run, the number 33 has to be a big part of that. He has to make more top plays down the stretch.
That was one that I had on my short list, that double pass that he ended up recovering and swatting the ball away from George Kittle was a fantastic play and ultimately took away 7 points because I think if George Kittle gets that ball in his hands, he's probably gone. So really good play by him. So hopefully the second half of the season we'll have more options. Offense, it felt like there was a lot more competition for that top play. Defense, we were kind of reaching, looking for one because the defense has struggled for much of this half and hasn't created many turnovers. Thanks for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen every day. Now make your second listen to Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson give you the expert NFL analysis in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available on all platforms. You can follow me on Twitter at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to check out Locked On Seahawks on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and the all-new Odyssey app. Coming up on tomorrow's episode, with it being a bye week, going to do a second mailbag segment answering your questions and also going to rank the 9 games left on the Seahawks schedule as we head towards the second half of the season. Thanks for listening in. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Go Hawks.